Hello and welcome back to the Freight Flow Advisor Brief. This podcast is all about connecting policy, markets, and real-world freight decisions in under 15 minutes. Now, today's episode is about a housing law that quietly became one of the most important freight stories of 2026. At midnight on July 10th, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act became federal law. Now, it didn't have a big signing ceremony, but it essentially slipped past the president's desk. So if you run trucks or you manage capacity, maybe you plan networks, or you simply allocate capital and logistics, I think this episode is worth your time. So let's start from the top and explain what just happened. Congress passed a massive housing bill. It's officially called the 21st Century Road to Housing Act, or H.R. 6644. The key thing to know about this is it's the most comprehensive federal housing package in roughly 3 decades. It pulls together dozens of different housing measures and unifies them into one single law. Now, it passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. The Senate vote was 85-5 and the House vote was 358-32. Now, in today's political climate, that level of bipartisan support is rare, which means this is a serious attempt to change how housing gets built in the United States. Now, there is a twist on this. President Trump refused to sign it, but he also didn't veto it. He publicly tied his signature to an entirely different bill, the Save America Act, and then simply let the 10-day constitutional clock run out. You see, under Article 1 of Section 7 of the Constitution, if a president doesn't sign or veto a bill and Congress is in session, it automatically becomes law. So now that we've gotten all of that out of the way, let's talk about what this means for freight. In order to really illustrate why this matters, we're going to try to connect some dots here. You see, housing is one of the most reliable drivers of freight demand. When construction is strong, trucking and rail feel it. I mean, you have to really think about everything that's involved in building or converting homes. There's dirt work and heavy equipment to start the site. There's lumber, steel, drywall, glass, and concrete for the structure, HVAC systems, electrical, plumbing, and then you have appliances, furniture, fixtures at the end. Now, the way I see it, every one of those is a freight move, and it spans across flatbed, dry van, LTL, intermodal, and drayage. The U.S. is already spending at a historic level on construction. The Census Bureau reported that total construction spending in May of 2026 was at $2.21 trillion, with about $930 billion of that tied to residential construction. The law is designed to push those numbers even higher. And it's not just focused on this year either. It's focused over the next decade. This is a demand story that really sits directly on top of a capacity plan. It's also a rate conversation you'll have over the coming years. So as we dig into the Road Act, one thing that you need to know is it is long. It combines something like 56 different provisions across 12 titles to tackle housing supply, financing, homelessness, veteran housing, disaster recovery, and a whole lot more. But if you're in freight, there are really 3 pieces that I feel matter the most. The first is manufactured housing and the chassis rule. For decades, federal rules effectively required manufactured homes to be built on a permanent steel chassis under the HUD code. That sounds technical, but it had a real-world impact. It shaped design, it held back innovation, and it added cost. Now, the Road Act removes that permanent chassis requirement for manufactured homes. Analysts estimate the change alone could reduce the per unit construction cost by $5,000 to $10,000. Now, that's a meaningful savings, especially for buyers at the lower end of the market. This matters in freight because manufactured homes are factory built and they're shipped from plants and delivered almost entirely by specialized and flatbed carriers. Did you know there are about 20.6 million Americans living in manufactured homes already? So lowering that cost and opening up new design options, things like a potential 2-story unit, that's likely to increase the demand for this particular form of housing, especially in Sunbelt areas where there is more land available. Section 302 of the Act also directs HUD to look at FHA construction financing barriers for modular housing and rework them. So you really got 2 things happening: manufacturing homes gets cheaper, modular construction gets easier to finance, more factory built homes, and every incremental unit is a specialized haul that doesn't move by parcel or rail car for that matter. It's almost always riding on a truck. The second piece around this legislation is the commercial to residential conversions. Now, I've been seeing this in certain pockets of the country, mainly New York, but this particular piece kind of speeds that up. The Reside Act, which is part of the law, it offers $1 to $10 million per project to convert vacant warehouses, factories, malls, and hotels into housing. These projects are targeted to economically distressed areas and opportunity zones. These places are where the real estate is often cheaper, but the infrastructure can be more complicated. I picture a conversion project from a freight perspective because it starts with demolition and debris hauling. Then you're bringing in structural steel, concrete, and heavy materials. After that come mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems. Finally, you're moving in drywall, windows, doors, flooring, and appliances. Each conversion is a multi-month, multi-mode freight campaign. Altus Group notes that the law also streamlines environmental review for certain HUD-assisted infill and office to residential conversions. So the translation here is fewer procedural delays, faster project timelines, and freight demand pulled forward. The third piece about this is the Build Now Act and the Innovation Fund. The Build Now Act ties community development block grant allocations to housing production. It's pretty simple. Cities that build more housing get more federal money. Cities that block housing get less. This is not a one-time stimulus check. It's more of a durable incentive system. It's embedded in how the federal funds flow. So on top of that, the Innovation Fund puts $200 million per year into competitive grants for 7 years, so $1.4 billion total. Now, these grants go to communities that can prove they are moving the needle on housing supply. More permits, more starts, more completions, they all equal more freight. So if you layer this on top of what we already know, construction costs are elevated, and steel has embedded tariff costs of at least $15 to $25 per square foot in some multifamily projects. If you've been paying attention, you know that freight costs are also under upward pressure. In fact, analysts like C.H. Robinson have been flagging higher truckload spot rates and steady flatbed demand across 2025 and 2026. So the Road Act doesn't effectively remove the cost headwinds. It simply adds demand pressure into an already tight market. So let's take a quick commercial break and talk about how you manage all of this as a decision maker. Because if you're listening to this, chances are you've had some version of this conversation, maybe in the last quarter. And that's exactly why Freight FA exists. It's an intelligence platform focused on AI-driven cost visibility and scenario planning. Inside the product is the Freight Flow Advisor chat. It lets you ask questions the way you think. For example, you can ask it, what does a 10% increase in manufactured housing in Texas do to my flatbed rates over, let's say, the next 2 quarters? The answer that you get back is a structured, data-backed answer. It's not generic commentary. It's tied directly to pricing and capacity in your network. So on top of that, Freight FA gives you AI-powered freight cost estimates. These estimates can help you benchmark your current contracts, see where you may be overpaying for certain lanes, or you could run quick what-if scenarios. Look, our goal at Freight FA is to get you away from juggling a stack of spreadsheets and market reports and consolidate into a platform that speaks your language. If you want to see what that looks like, head over to freightfa.com and try our Freight Flow Advisor chat. It's built for exactly the kind of volatility we're talking about today. That's freightfa.com. Okay, as we pivot back to the Road to Housing Act, one other thing caught my attention, and that's the investor ban. It's essentially a limit on big institutional owners of single-family rental homes. And what this does is it potentially shrinks the future housing supply and construction pipeline. Now, in the final version of the bill, Title 10 establishes homes for people and not corporations. It effectively bans entities that control 350 or more single-family homes from buying additional existing family rentals. Now, if they violate that rule, they face penalties up to $1 million per violation, or 3 times the purchase price, whichever is higher. But there are three key caveats. And the first is there is no forced sale requirement. Investors aren't being forced to sell what they already own. Second, the ban sunsets after 15 years. And third, the build to rent projects that exist out there are not subject to the earlier forced sale language. Now, if you're wondering how this ties back to freight, I think it's pretty clear that capital isn't leaving the space. It's being nudged away from buying existing stock and toward funding new construction. So from a freight perspective, new construction is what you care about, because existing homes changing ownership doesn't generate much freight. Building new homes absolutely does. So while some early commentary framed this as anti-investor, the actual structure that passed is far more like pro-supply. It says if you're big, stop buying the existing homes and go build. Now, the key thing to remember here is that once the machine starts moving, freight volume will follow, but the timeline is really measured in years, not weeks. A reasonable expectation for real visible freight impact from this law is about 12 to 36 months. And that really depends on the program and the market involved. I'm going to give you 5 signposts that matter. First, the Treasury guidance on the 350 home threshold. How control is defined across funds, joint ventures, and affiliates will really determine how big investors adapt. Second, HUD appropriations in the next budget cycle will really tell the story, because the size or absence of funding for the Innovation Fund and whole home repairs will tell you whether this law will have real operational teeth or remain underpowered. Third, manufactured housing and modular production volumes. When HUD finalizes the changes on the chassis rule and updates standards, watch plant level data, because increased output is a direct flatbed and a specialized freight story. Fourth, the Reside grant awards by region. The first wave of conversion grants will reveal which metros are serious about turning dead malls and warehouses into hotels and housing. Fifth and last, flatbed construction freight rates across key corridors will need to be watched, because we already know flatbed demand has been stronger than dry van in 2026. So to wrap this up, here's the big picture. The 21st Century Road to Housing Act is not just a housing policy, it's really a multi-year freight story hiding inside of housing legislation. It's covering what gets built, where it gets built, and who pays for it. So listen, if you found this breakdown helpful, there's a full analysis of this up on our Substack. Just head over to substack.com and search the Freight FA brief. And remember to head over to freightfa.com and plug in your lanes. You can follow us on social media at The Freight Flow Advisor on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify. And lastly, you can watch us on YouTube at The Freight Flow Advisor. Until next time, this has been your Freight Flow Advisor brief.